I still remember the first day I returned to my grandfather's old ranch outside Redwood Heights, a small town in the American heartland where oak trees flanked winding roads and every neighbor seemed to know each other's entire life story. Back then, I was just a rookie in my early 20s, with big city ideas about starting a tech venture. The ranch itself had always been a nostalgic symbol in our family, a quiet retreat my grandfather built with his own hands, complete with a weather-beaten barn, a dilapidated fence, and rolling fields that seemed to stretch well beyond our official property lines. It was here that my mother spent her summers running barefoot among tall grasses, collecting wildflowers. And it was also here I had come every winter for our big extended family holiday gathering. Even so, life's obligations had pulled me away for years, and when Granddad passed, I hesitated to set foot on the land again. Yet a strange phone call from a man named Logan Price, claiming to be part of the local homeowners association, finally compelled me to drive all night from Seattle to Redwood Heights. He sounded agitated on the phone, insisted I show up in person, and gave only cryptic hints about unexpected developments on the property. Tired but intrigued, I arrived at dawn, the horizon glowing pale orange behind the silhouette of the countryside. Stepping out of my SUV, I could hardly believe my eyes. An imposing iron gate, brand new street lamps, and numerous signs advertising Redwood Estates. A vibrant, top-tier community that apparently occupied a chunk of my grandfather's land. I blinked twice, not quite sure if I was hallucinating. I had known Redwood Estates was a large-scale housing development that started building around Redwood Heights a decade ago, but I never imagined that one day, rows of cookie-cutter homes and meticulously manicured lawns would suddenly appear on what I still believe to be my family's farmland. I approached a security guard stationed at the front gate and explained who I was. He looked at me like he didn't quite believe my claim that I owned the land he was guarding. It took some back and forth, plus a flash of my grandfather's property deed, to finally convince him to grant me access. Driving in, I saw half-finished houses lined up in neat rows, tall fences dividing parcels, construction equipment parked near a large sales office, and glossy marketing posters featuring families happily barbecuing together beneath the Redwood Heights sun. Yet something about this manicured perfection gave me goosebumps. It felt too well orchestrated, like an elaborate stage set erected overnight. I saw a ho-hum of Redwood Estates banners draped across street corners, extolling residents to enjoy the best of communal living. I couldn't help but wonder how any of this could be legal, since my family never sold the land. Soon I noticed a small crowd forming near a large white portable office at the center of the development. Men in suits and women in business casual attire milled about, pointing at blueprints pinned to portable walls. I could see Logan Price waving me over, easily recognizable from his phone call. He was mid-40s with a sharp, anxious expression, hair slicked back, and a distinct sense of self-importance emanating from his stance. As I approached, he cleared his throat, introduced himself, and ushered me inside with an urgency that made my heart pound faster. Right away, he launched into an explanation about how the Redwood Estates HOA had been planning this community for years, how they had a special arrangement with the prior caretaker of the farmland, someone who produced a suspicious transfer deed a few years ago, giving the development team the green light. He confessed that, as they neared completion, certain records from the county property office revealed significant discrepancies. It appeared that an old will or addendum from my grandfather's estate indicated the land was never actually sold. Suddenly, everything came to a standstill. Investors, realtors, potential residents, and the entire Redwood Estates project got stuck in limbo as official ownership was called into question. What shook me most was not just the presence of the new development, but the insinuation that someone posing as my grandfather's representative had effectively tricked the county into believing Redwood Estates had rightful claim to that land. My gut tightened with anger and confusion. I wanted answers, but Logan insisted the best immediate course of action was to cooperate with the HOA. He tried to sweeten the deal by pointing out opportunities for me to profit if I simply agreed to sign some documents affirming the HOA's rights. That pitch made me bristle. It was my grandfather's land, left to me fair and square. I had no intention of rubber-stamping a fraudulent project just for financial gain. Sensing my reluctance, Logan shifted tactics and warned that if I didn't consent, the county and the development might turn against me, possibly dragging me through lengthy legal battles. His thinly veiled threat only fueled my determination. As I stepped outside that portable office, the morning light had grown sharper, illuminating every new building, every sign, every crisp lawn. A wave of memories washed over me, afternoons spent with Granddad, learning how to fish at the pond near the property's edge, trailing along behind him as he showed me which wild plants were edible, or listening to his old war stories in the rocking chairs on the porch. I kept recalling one rainy afternoon when he told me, "This land has secrets, and one day you'll discover them when you need them most." It had sounded romantic and cryptic at the time, but now the recollection hit me like an electric jolt. Was there really some hidden puzzle piece he had left behind, something that would clarify this entire mess? Determined not to be pushed around, I decided to stay at the ranch house, despite the fact it had fallen into disrepair over the years, to dig for any old records or documents that could confirm my rightful ownership. That night, the sky was peppered with stars, the same wide-open sky I remembered from childhood, but overshadowed by the glare of new streetlights courtesy of Redwood Estates. I found a cot in the still-standing barn and tried my best to sleep amid the swirling questions in my mind. Tension kept me wide awake, so around midnight I trudged into the main ranch house. The power had been shut off, but I used a flashlight to navigate. Every dusty corner and creaky floorboard beckoned me deeper into old memories. Boxes of photographs, letters, and receipts lay scattered in the living room. I flipped through them, hoping to find something that would expose the truth. A snap of a twig outside startled me. My heart rate spiked, and I peered through a window to see a shadowy figure slip away into the darkness. I rushed outside, only to catch the faint glow of a flashlight disappearing among the half-built houses. Someone was snooping around, maybe even following me, and that spiked my determination to move quickly. I stayed up until dawn, rummaging through every closet and trunk. Then, in a corner of the old study, I discovered a hidden panel in the wall. Inside it, I found a small wooden box marked with my grandfather's initials. My hands shook as I pried it open. Inside lay a series of old handwritten notes, some legal-looking papers, and a tarnished key. My grandfather's handwriting, neat yet bold, dominated the pages, referencing a time capsule, a chunk of property lines that nobody must dare exploit, and something he called the Redwood Clause. I had no clue what that meant. The sense of intrigue deepened, though, when I noticed the legal documents spelled out conditions under which the land could never be sold without explicit approval from direct descendants. My mind raced. Could this Redwood Clause be the trump card that would shut down the HOA's fraudulent claim? Before I could process the gravity of this discovery, I heard an engine outside. I stuffed the documents and the key into my jacket and stepped out onto the old porch. A truck bearing the Redwood Estates logo pulled up, and a man I'd never seen before hopped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp collared shirt with an ID badge that read William Holt, HOA Legal Counsel. He walked up to me with an overly friendly grin, introduced himself, and claimed the HOA was more than willing to negotiate a settlement. I kept my poker face. He explained that Redwood Estates was, after all, nearly complete, with dozens of families scheduled to move in. If I insisted on an ownership dispute, he said, it would create unnecessary chaos for future residents, not to mention the local economy. They'd pay me a handsome sum to step aside. I asked about the suspicious documents the county had on file. Holt's demeanor faltered momentarily, but he quickly tried to hide it, saying, "Well, these things happen in property deals all the time, especially with older farmland. Probably a simple mistake." I didn't buy it. I told him I needed time, that I'd think about it. He gave me his card and drove away, but the sinking feeling in my stomach persisted. The more pushy they got, the more certain I became that Redwood Estates and the entire HOA were deeply embroiled in shady business. After carefully locking my new stash of documents in the glove compartment of my SUV, I decided to head into town to see if I could find more about the Redwood Clause. Maybe a local attorney or the county clerk's office would have information, but Redwood Heights, like many small towns, had limited resources and the county clerk's office was only open 3 days a week. I made an appointment for the next day. Meanwhile, I wandered into the only coffee shop in town, the Roasted Bean, hoping to overhear local chatter or bump into someone who had knowledge of my grandfather's dealings. The interior smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon pastries. The chalkboard menu featured cutesy drinks named after Redwood Heights landmarks. I ordered a latte and scanned the room. A table of older men played cards near the window, teenage girls giggled in the corner, and a middle-aged woman in a flannel shirt typed on her laptop. I settled into a table near the men playing cards, hoping they might have local gossip. Gradually, I nudged a conversation their way, mentioning my family name and the farmland just outside town. One old-timer named Earl perked up. He remembered my grandfather well, said he was a tough but fair man who had unbreakable principles about the land. Apparently, Granddad once shut down a corporate hog farming operation that tried to pollute the local water supply. That conversation shed light on my grandfather's relentless dedication to preserving the land's integrity. Earl also vaguely recalled that Granddad always carried around a locked metal box whenever he visited the county records office back in the day. My ears burned with curiosity. That box might well be the one I found hidden in the house. Could it hold the Redwood Clause that might blow the HOA's scheme wide open? Spurred on by this new hope, I returned to the ranch, determined to re-examine the documents more thoroughly. But as soon as I parked my SUV, I noticed muddy footprints around my vehicle's driver's side door. Panic surged. Had someone tried to break into my car? I yanked open the door. Sure enough, the glove compartment was slightly ajar. My heart pounded. The wooden box and the documents were still there, but the top page looked out of place. Someone had definitely rifled through them. Thankfully, they didn't take anything. Maybe they didn't have enough time or got spooked. Regardless, it confirmed my suspicion. The HOA or their cronies were keeping close tabs on me. I decided to move the documents to a safer location. In the old barn near the horse stalls, there was a trap door leading to an underground shelter my grandfather had built decades ago for storm emergencies. That small space was damp and musty, but it felt more secure than leaving them in my car or the main house. That night I couldn't sleep at all. Every tiny creak or gust of wind felt ominous, like someone was outside, waiting to pounce. I stood by the window, glancing at the partial glow from Redwood Estates streetlights, unsettled by how quickly this entire fiasco had escalated. The next morning I drove to the county clerk's office, documents carefully hidden in my backpack. The clerk, Linda Quinn, was a friendly, soft-spoken woman who remembered my grandfather fondly. I explained the situation and she pulled out the official property records. To my dismay, the scanned copies she showed me were incomplete. Key pages regarding the farmland's ownership and restrictions were missing. Linda frowned and said that this was highly unusual as their office prided itself on meticulous record-keeping. The missing segments, ironically, were the very pages that would confirm or deny Redwood Estates' right to develop on the land. She offered to do some digging in the backup archives, but that could take time. As I was about to leave, Linda lowered her voice and confided that a group of developers came by months ago, requested to see the farmland's records, and demanded copies. She found them pushy and a bit intimidating. After that visit, Linda noticed certain files started disappearing or getting misfiled. She suspected foul play but had no proof. I thanked her for her candor, promising I'd keep her updated on what I found. Outside, I leaned against my SUV, a swirl of anger and determination stirring inside me. It was becoming clear Redwood Estates was not just overzealous, they were actively covering their tracks. I resolved that the next step was to examine the documents from my grandfather's hidden box in more detail. I wanted to figure out exactly what the Redwood Clause stated, So that evening I borrowed a lantern from the barn and descended into the underground shelter. With musty air thick in my lungs, I carefully spread out the pages on a makeshift wooden table. My grandfather's writing referred repeatedly to a special arrangement made with the State Environmental Board decades ago. According to these notes, Redwood Heights Natural Aquifer ran beneath our farmland, making it a critical resource for the entire region. The Redwood Clause apparently mandated that no large-scale development could take place without a thorough environmental impact study, and, crucially, the explicit consent of the farmland's rightful heir. That meant me. In other words, if Redwood Estates had indeed tried to bypass these conditions, they were not only violating property law but could also be in breach of state environmental regulations. It didn't take a lawyer to see how damning this was for the HOA. Redwood Estates was basically an illegal construction site, built on land they had no rightful claim to, ignoring every regulation my grandfather had put in place to protect the aquifer. I imagined how furious he'd be if he saw bulldozers flattening the soil he'd protected his whole life. A surge of righteous anger ignited in me. I realized I had to act quickly to stop the continuing construction and hold these people accountable. But how? The local authorities might already be influenced by Redwood Estates, considering all the big money involved. I needed a plan to reveal the truth publicly. The next morning, as the sun's rays cut through the barn's openings, I formulated a strategy. I would gather all the local stakeholders, town residents, local media, environmental experts, maybe even the mayor, and I'd present the Redwood Clause documents along with my original property deed. If I could stir enough public outcry and get official eyes on the evidence, Redwood Estates couldn't simply sweep this under the rug. I made phone calls to old acquaintances from Redwood Heights to small local newspapers and to a college friend who worked for an environmental nonprofit. I didn't reveal everything, just enough to pique their interest. Word spread fast in a small community. Within a couple of days, I managed to set up a town hall meeting in the Redwood Heights Community Center, a modest building that doubled as the library during weekdays. The response was surprisingly robust. A local reporter, Karen Bridges, promised to attend, as did a small group of local farmers curious about the ranch's fate. Even the mayor's assistant confirmed that someone from City Hall would be there to hear my concern. My only worry was that Redwood Estates or the HOA might try to crash the event or sabotage it. My fear was not unfounded. The night before the meeting, I found a threatening note tacked to the barn door. It read, "Stop digging for trouble or you'll regret it," signed with only a crude drawing of a pine tree. I had no doubt it came from people associated with Redwood Estates. For a split second, I wondered if I should back down. But that fleeting thought vanished as I remembered my grandfather's teachings and the unwavering resolve he instilled in me. On the day of the town hall, I arrived early at the community center with a box full of documents. The small hall was filled with fold-out chairs and a simple podium at the front. As folks started trickling in, I scanned the crowd, noticing a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and concern. Logan Price from the HOA was there, trying to appear calm while quietly conversing with a man in an expensive suit. I presumed it was William Holt, their legal counsel. The mayor's representative, a young man named Travis, sat off to the side with a clipboard. The hum of whispered conversations grew as more people took their seats. Finally, I stepped up to the podium, laid out my story, and explained how Redwood Estates was constructed on property with questionable ownership documents. I revealed how crucial the land was to the region's aquifer and how my grandfather's Redwood Clause specifically prohibited such development without explicit consent and environmental clearance. I held up the original paperwork, including my grandfather's will, the Redwood Clause, and other legal attachments, pointing out that certain county files had vanished, which hinted strongly at tampering. Emotions in the room were palpable. On one hand, Redwood Estates promised new housing, jobs, and tax revenue. On the other hand, the possibility of corrupted land deals and the environmental threat to the aquifer was alarming. Logan Price tried to counter, claiming Redwood Estates had followed all protocols, that I was simply misinformed. He insisted they had every legal right, William Holt echoed those sentiments, spouting legal jargon about good faith investment and substantial completion. Then I produced one of the biggest surprises, a scanned copy of a letter signed by someone forging my grandfather's name, allegedly consenting to Redwood Estates' plan. The signature was obviously inauthentic once you compared it to actual examples of my grandfather's handwriting. I described how I found it suspicious that Redwood Estates only produced this letter after my grandfather had already passed away. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. As tension mounted in the air, a new voice spoke up from the back. Earl, the old-timer from the coffee shop. He declared he'd known my grandfather for decades and personally witnessed him reject a similar proposal from a different developer 20 years before. He said there was no way my grandfather would have changed his stance, especially behind closed doors. This testimony carried weight for the local townsfolk, many of whom respected Earl's honesty. Logan Price and William Holt looked visibly uncomfortable. Just when the debate reached a boiling point, the doors burst open and Linda Quinn from the county clerk's office walked in with a thick binder in her arms. She had spent her evenings tracking down original archived records in an out-of-town repository. Now, she brandished them like an arsenal of truth. She explained how Redwood Estates' supposed deed transfer was glaringly missing the Redwood Clause references and had no official notary stamps from the State Environmental Board. According to these original, unaltered records, the farmland remained protected. The crowd erupted with questions, demands, outrage. Logan and Holt tried to talk over the uproar, but it was futile. Amid the frenzy, I saw an older man in a baseball cap quietly slip in, standing near the back. I didn't recognize him at first, but as the chaos died down, he introduced himself as Jim Webster, a retired county auditor who had known my grandfather well. He took a deep breath and stated that he had come across multiple discrepancies when Redwood Estates first got approval. He'd raised flags with his supervisor, but someone higher up silenced him. Now he was finally stepping forward because he couldn't stomach the deceit any longer. A hush fell over the room. In that moment, Redwood Estates' illusions crumbled. Their representatives, forced to confront the mounting evidence, tried one last maneuver. They insisted the Redwood Clause was outdated and invalid, but Jim Webster calmly pointed out that state law never repealed the environmental protections. The Redwood Clause remained binding. Trapped and exposed, Logan Price and William Holt had little choice but to admit they were aware of some irregularities, but had hoped to rectify them quietly. The town hall erupted in anger and a call for immediate legal action. By evening's end, Redwood Estates development permits were suspended pending a full investigation. The mayor's office announced an immediate halt to all construction and scheduled a formal hearing to review the legality of Redwood Estates' entire operation. Cameras flashed as the local news reporter took statements from me, Linda, Earl, and Jim Webster. My chest felt heavy with a mix of relief, nervousness, and a lingering suspicion that the HOA wouldn't back down easily, yet the tide of public sentiment had clearly turned. The next day, Redwood Heights buzzed with talk about the fiasco at Redwood Estates. Many residents who had initially supported the development felt betrayed. Some local business owners felt torn, since Redwood Estates had pumped money into the community, but the environmental risk and the blatant fraud overshadowed any economic advantage. Supporters of the HOA started distancing themselves from Logan Price and William Holt, worried about being implicated in wrongdoing. Meanwhile, I delved deeper into my grandfather's notes, hoping to uncover anything else that might be relevant for the upcoming hearing. That's when I noticed references to an environmental buffer zone near the edge of the property land that had never been cleared or farmed, set aside to protect wildlife and water quality. The Redwood Clause specifically mentioned building restrictions near this zone. Redwood Estates had actually broken ground well within the buffer, meaning the Environmental Board would likely come down on them even harder. I filed this information away for the next legal steps. Over the following weeks, tensions simmered. Redwood Estates put up a fight, hiring a high-powered law firm from out of town to contest my claims. They demanded that the hearing be postponed indefinitely while they reviewed new evidence. But with Linda Quinn's original records and testimonies from local witnesses, their defenses looked flimsy. The mayor, bowing to public pressure, refused to postpone. A date was set. Redwood Heights' first ever official tribunal on environmental and property law violations would be held in the town's modest courthouse. As the hearing approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The courthouse was a squat brick building near the center of town, usually handling minor disputes and traffic tickets, not major land cases with millions of dollars on the line. On the morning of the hearing, the place was packed with local residents, farmers, and even activists from nearby counties who worried that the aquifer's pollution could spread. The local press was present in full force, cameras and microphones capturing every expression. The judge, an older woman named Harriet Bradley, presided with a calm but firm demeanor. She listened carefully as my lawyer, whom I'd scrambled to hire, presented the Redwood Clause, my grandfather's will, the original records from Linda Quinn, and a string of witnesses, including Earl and Jim Webster. Then Redwood Estates attorneys presented their arguments. They claimed they had been deceived themselves by the forged documents, that they had no idea the Redwood Clause existed, that they had acted in good faith, and it was too late to undo such a large development. Finally, I had the chance to speak directly. I explained from my heart how this land had been in my family for generations, how my grandfather labored to preserve it, and how Redwood Estates was not just a property dispute but a violation of the community's well-being. I described the forging of his signature as a personal affront to our family's legacy. My voice caught in my throat at one point, but I pressed on, determined to defend what my grandfather held dear. For a moment, Redwood Estates attorneys tried to question the authenticity of my documents, but Linda Quinn and Jim Webster confirmed everything with official stamps and cross-references. The final blow came when the State Environmental Board's representative testified via video call, affirming that the Redwood Clause was still valid and Redwood Estates had never sought or received the required environmental clearance. The attorneys for Redwood Estates looked defeated, exchanging worried glances. Judge Bradley took a recess to review all the evidence. When she returned to deliver her ruling, the courtroom fell silent. She declared that the Redwood Clause was binding and Redwood Estates had violated both property law and environmental regulations. The county was instructed to revoke Redwood Estates building permits immediately and freeze further construction. She stated that the rightful ownership remained with me, consistent with my grandfather's final will. The new development was illegal. Applause erupted, cameras flashed, and reporters bombarded me with questions. I stepped outside, my breath unsteady, tears welling up as I gazed at the wide sky overhead. In that moment, I felt my grandfather's presence, as though he were right there on the courthouse steps, smiling with approval. But the saga didn't end neatly. While the ruling stopped Redwood Estates in its tracks, the half-finished houses and newly built roads sprawled across the farmland remained a glaring problem. The question now was whether they would be demolished or repurposed. The public sentiment leaned toward reclamation of the land, but it was a complicated process, involving lawsuits against Redwood Estates, potential refunds for families who had already made down payments, and lawsuits from investors. Despite the swirl of legal complexities, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. At least the immediate threat to the aquifer and the farmland's integrity was halted. In the weeks that followed, Redwood Heights found itself in the national spotlight. A few environmental organizations reached out, praising my fight to uphold the Redwood Clause. One group, called Earth Keepers, proposed turning part of the land into a publicly accessible conservation area, complete with educational trails about aquifers and sustainable land management. They offered funding to restore the buffer zone and to convert the half-finished houses into research offices or visitor centers. Part of me was hesitant. So many half-built structures seemed like a scar on the landscape, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt in line with my grandfather's vision. If we could transform Redwood Estates' ill-gotten remnants into something that served the community and protected the environment, it might be a fitting resolution. Meanwhile, Redwood Estates tried filing an appeal, claiming they'd lose millions if forced to abandon the project. The courts, however, were unsympathetic, citing the brazen forgery and the clear environmental breach. Public opinion also turned harshly against the HOA. Even their own members began resigning en masse after internal emails were leaked, revealing knowledge of the Redwood Clause much earlier than they'd admitted. Logan Price was forced to step down from his post, as was William Holt. Investigations into possible criminal charges for document tampering loomed over them. On top of that, the once towering Redwood Estates sign at the development's entrance was unceremoniously taken down. Despite these chaotic shifts, I found moments of peace walking the land at dusk. I'd stroll along the property boundaries, down past the half-constructed homes, across the rolling fields to the pond where my grandfather once taught me to fish. In the golden light, the farmland was still as beautiful as I remembered, resilient despite the damage inflicted by bulldozers and unscrupulous developers. One evening, I stopped by the old barn, recalling that cryptic statement from my grandfather years ago, "This land has secrets, and one day you'll discover them when you need them most." Indeed, his hidden box and the Redwood Clause were the keys that upended the entire scheme. In a sense, his words had come full circle, protecting me and the community from a harmful takeover. Over time, the county initiated a restoration plan. Earthkeepers led volunteer groups to remove debris, replant native grasses, and manage erosion. Funding from various environmental grants helped remedy the water table, ensuring the aquifer remained uncontaminated. I decided to partner with them and local officials to create Redwood Conservation Park, an initiative that would open a portion of the ranch for educational tours and agricultural demonstrations, reflecting my grandfather's legacy of stewardship. With the new plan, Redwood Heights began to see a different kind of future, one anchored in respect for the land rather than unchecked development. As Redwood Conservation Park took shape, I discovered how deeply the rest of the community cared. Once they were properly informed, students volunteered their weekends to help plant trees, local businesses donated materials, and the entire town rallied to transform the tarnished site into something inspiring. Meanwhile, Redwood Estates corporate backers slunk away, selling their assets at a loss and leaving behind a cautionary tale of greed meeting justice. Months later, we held a grand opening for Redwood Conservation Park. A small wooden stage was set up near the pond, and the crowd included local families, reporters, environmental activists, and even state officials who had come to witness the positive outcome of a community reclaiming its rightful land. I spoke a few words, dedicating the park to my grandfather's memory. I talked about the importance of vigilance, of standing up for what's right, and how a single family's farmland turned out to be the linchpin for preserving an entire region's water supply. As I closed my speech, a gentle breeze rustled the trees, and I felt a profound sense of closure. In the aftermath, I decided to stay in Redwood Heights. My original plan was to sell the farmland and head back to the city, but my perspective changed drastically. The ranch was no longer just a nostalgic memory. It was a living testament to my grandfather's principles and a beacon for community-driven conservation. I renovated the old ranch house, converting it into a modest homestead that embraced modern sustainability. I built a small tech workspace in one of the refurbished barns, launching an agri-tech startup focused on water management and soil renewal. This new path seemed to honor both my personal ambitions and the ranch's core values. Every so often, I'd receive letters from individuals in other states who faced similar battles with HOAs or developers. They thanked me for the inspiration, explaining that the Redwood Clause story became a sort of rallying cry for landowners determined to protect their heritage and the environment. Knowing my struggle resonated beyond Redwood Heights filled me with an immense sense of purpose. Of course, the memory of forging through sleepless nights, chasing missing records, and facing off against intimidating men in suits still haunted me at times. But the overarching lesson remained clear. When a community bands together, and when one stands firm on the shoulders of the ancestors who came before us, even the most powerful organizations can be held accountable. Now, when I walk through Redwood Conservation Park, I pause near a small plaque dedicated to my grandfather. It reads, "A man's true wealth is the good he does in the world." Those words echo through the oak groves, and children who come on school field trips ask me about the story behind the plaque. I share a simplified version of the tale, hoping to inspire the next generation of caretakers and champions. I explain how, once upon a time, an HOA tried to build their dream community on my property without a shred of respect for the land's legacy, and how my grandfather's secret changed everything. Typically, the kids gasp in disbelief before erupting into excited chatter. They love hearing about how an ordinary man stood up for justice. In a broader sense, I realize that my grandfather's secret was more than just a legal clause. It was a moral compass, a call to preserve not only the physical land, but also the spirit of fairness, integrity, and community cooperation. We often talk about leaving a better world for our children, but rarely do we acknowledge the silent guardians who prepared the path before us. My grandfather was one of those guardians, and his Redwood Clause was a testament to the power of foresight and love of home. Life in Redwood Heights became a tapestry of small-town neighborliness and forward-thinking conservation. Where Redwood Estates once stood, we erected interpretive signs that explained the flawed development, the battle in court, and the ultimate rebirth of the land as Redwood Conservation Park. Visitors walked the trails, reading about how quickly progress can become exploitation if we ignore nature's boundaries. They saw how a single voice can rally a community to right a wrong, and they left with a sense of hope that, though big money and intimidation tactics can stifle honesty for a while, truth has a way of resurfacing when people refuse to stay silent. We eventually replaced the old barn's roof and repurposed the structure for local events like harvest festivals and craft fairs. There, neighbors would sell homemade jams, fresh produce, and handmade crafts. In a bittersweet twist, some Redwood Estates investors, now keen on rehabilitating their public image, funded a portion of the barn's renovations. I took their money, but made it clear that Redwood Conservation Park would remain fully independent, governed by the same principle Granddad cherished: stewardship over greed. And so, to anyone who visits Redwood Heights today, the land appears as a vibrant patchwork of community gardens, walking trails, educational kiosks, and the rejuvenated ranch that remains in my family's name. The hush of the morning dew, the shimmer of the pond at sunset, and the lively chatter of residents at the weekend market all serve as daily reminders that not every dream community is built on deception. Some dreams grow organically, nourished by truth, respect for the past, and a shared vision for the future. In the end, the greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that our legacies, personal or collective, are shaped by how fiercely we protect the values we believe in. There will always be those who try to manipulate documents, forge signatures, or coerce rightful owners with hollow promises. Yet the courage to shine a light on deception, to link arms with allies, and to remain faithful to one's moral compass can counter even the most imposing forces. From that vantage, every step on my grandfather's farmland feels like a testament to resilience, a living chapter in a book he began writing decades ago. So, if you ever find yourself standing up against a powerful group that tries to swindle you out of your rights or your land, remember the Redwood Clause. Remember that beneath the surface of every field, every orchard, every beloved hometown property, there may lie a hidden truth, waiting for the right moment to surface. And more importantly, remember that communities come alive when individuals unite for a just cause, guided by the moral seeds planted by those who came before us. In the soft twilight, standing near the fence that separates the farmland from the rest of Redwood Heights, I often recall my grandfather's words. This land has secrets, and one day you'll discover them when you need them most. Indeed, his secret changed the fate of both my family's property and an entire region's future. And as I watch the silhouettes of neighbors strolling through Redwood Conservation Park, I can't help but feel grateful. He taught me that sometimes, to protect what truly matters, you must confront the storm, even if it means taking on powerful institutions. Because at the end of the day, there's a deeper purpose guiding you, one that resonates beyond court battles and forged documents, echoing the timeless bond we share with the land, each other, and the truth. Looking back on it all, I realized the greatest victory wasn't the legal triumph, or even the restoration of the farmland. It was the unbreakable unity that took root among friends, neighbors, and strangers alike. It was the lesson that to preserve our shared heritage, we must be courageous enough to defend it against greed, and humble enough to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before. That is the ultimate gift my grandfather left behind. Not just a protected piece of property, but a living, breathing reminder that integrity, community, and respect for nature are the bedrock upon which all genuine dream communities must be built. And that, for everyone who has followed this journey, is the deeper wisdom I want to share. True ownership is about stewardship, not exploitation. True justice is about confronting wrongdoing, no matter how formidable it seems. True legacy is about planting seeds for future generations to harvest, ensuring that our children and grandchildren will inherit not just land or property, but a guiding moral flame. Therefore, the profound takeaway from this story is a timeless one. When we stand rooted in our beliefs and honor the wisdom passed down through our loved ones, no intimidating force, be it a powerful HOA or a cunning developer, can easily uproot us. We find the strength to persevere, the clarity to see right from wrong, and the generosity to shape a better world. That is the heartbeat of Redwood Heights, the legacy of my grandfather, and the promise we owe to the ones who will follow in our footsteps.